Welcome to Mormon Book Reviews, where an evangelical encounters the restoration. I'm your host, Stephen Peinecker, and of course, this is actually a special thing, Mormon Media Reviews, which often means that Rebecca Biblioteca is the co-host. Welcome back to the program, Rebecca.
Oh, thank you so much, Steve. I'm excited for this interview. We've been scheduling this, had it on the books for a while, and it's finally happening this morning. I'm really happy.
Now, many of you may recognize this guest here, Sarah Edmondson, who is actually has a show on HBO called The Vow. She wrote a book. Show your book, Sarah, real quick, just so people, this is a book review show. So, okay, Scarred, okay. And she was part of the NXIVM cult. And it's a crazy story. But before we get there, Sarah, welcome, Edmondson, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me. Yes, I think you're right. This is the longest it's taken to schedule an interview I've ever had. So I'm happy to finally be here chatting with your community and ready to answer any questions. I have to also preface it by saying I took a break this summer, took like a 2-month break from interviews, and I'm feeling a little rusty, but it'll be organic and not polished, and that'll just be fine.
That's what we like. So
Sarah, you can practice here.
Sarah's a well-renowned actor. I was remember you're from Canada, Leo Award-winning actress and everything like that, which is a big deal in Canada.
Wait, nominated, not winning.
I thought, well, you'll get it next year, okay?
Maybe.
You'll get it. So, but you're a Canadian actress. I recognize her from many programs. I saw that you've been on Psych and you've been on some science fiction programs that I like. You've been on Hallmark movie channels and all this kind of stuff. So you've had this really interesting portfolio, and you have this crazy life in which you get sucked into this group, which is kind of like, oh, this is a group that can help you and help me with my career. And you actually get involved as somebody who actually organizes a chapter in Canada. And it's like this crazy story. And the reason why I wanted Sarah to come on the program was many of you know that I was, of course, an atheist for like 12 years. And part of the reason I left religion was because of the spiritual and religious abuse that I experienced. And I'm still I feel like I'm recovered, but I did suffer a lot of PTSD, and a lot of it was religious induced trauma. And I know many of you are at different places in your life, and some of you have left conventional evangelical Christianity. Some of you have left the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. We're not judging anybody's church that they came from. We just want to talk about the experiences that you as an individual have had, and how we can also, that Sarah's story can be a story also of healing and redemption, and being able to move past what's happened to you. And so I think it's just a great story that we want to talk about. So Sarah, I mean, I don't even know where to begin on something like this, other than how does somebody like you, who's obviously very smart, you're a beautiful person, how does somebody get caught up in something like this group? What was the appeal to you initially?
I think it's a great question. And what most people want to know is, like, how did this happen? I have to kind of set the stage of what my life was like back then. I'm in my 40s now. Then I was in my 20s. And I've always been a seeker. I've always been interested in personal development. My parents are in the mental health profession. My mom's a family therapist. My dad at the time was a school counselor. Now he's a psychotherapist. So working on myself and therapy was always something that I was very interested in addition to having my own, not religious, but spiritual path of wanting to grow. And it's, I go into the very specific details of that mindset in the book, but what I would say that I think it's important for people is that I also had a deep desire to belong, be part of community, have more meaning in my life. I was an actor. I'm taking a break at the moment, but I found that the work that I was doing as an actor wasn't particularly fulfilling, or, vampire TV shows, beer commercials. It just didn't, I thought I had a bigger purpose in my life. And at the time, I had seen a movie called What the Bleep Do We Know, by a filmmaker who I happened to meet at a film festival. And it was, at the time, I kind of thought it was divine timing, or, the universe alignment, whatever you want to call it. But I think what it was is right place at the right time. What I've learned now as a term is situational vulnerability. I was looking for something. I was feeling unfulfilled. I was having these deep yearnings for more. And I met somebody who, with totally good intentions, the filmmaker and I are on great terms now. But at the time, he didn't know either what he was inviting me to. And it just sounded like something that really appealed to me, so much so that I didn't even Google it or research. I just trusted Mark, the director of What the Bleep. And he basically said, if you like my film, you'd love this workshop I just took. And I'm like, sign me up. And that was the beginning. And it to encapsulate the 12 years there, there's many different changes, but it started as one thing, as a personal development program, a goals program, a community of like-minded individuals who were trying to, change the world one person at a time. It had a really beautiful mission, a really altruistic mission is what it seemed on the outside. And that appealed to me. The being accountable to other people. I had a coach, which really appealed to me. It had after my first 5-day, which I can go into in more detail, I felt like I'd been given the answers to the world. Like I had a roadmap to how to live. And I finally found my tribe, B, a roadmap for success, especially in a world like acting where you can do all the right things and look good and go to class and stuff, but still not book the part. I found something like, well, if you do X, Y, and Z, you can go to the next level. It was a proposed sort of ladder of success. And that really appealed to me. So it kind of hit on all the buttons. And then eventually it was also offered to me as a career that I could earn money by bringing people in and producing other seminars like I'd gone to, which was sort of a natural fit for me. I've always been good at sales. And now I had something I could sell and feel really good about. So yeah, that's a lot of things. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, well, it's kind of like a multi-level marketing kind of cultish type kind of thing. And I
Yes.
just wanted to, so what I'm really curious about, what were the things that you were learning early on that were really having a positive impact on you, that you really felt like it gave you a roadmap, it gave you a community? What kind of principles were they teaching that made it unique, or that really resonated with you, that really helped you, it's apparently helped you at least early on?
Yeah. And just to address your other comment, we were told it wasn't an MLM, multi-level marketing,
They
because
always say that.
MLMs are not ethical. And this is ethical. This is a standard business model that's completely ethical. So, that went over my head. I laugh about it now. What were the principles? I mean, ultimately, God, this is gonna have to dig into my memory bank to pull some of these things up. But I'd say one of the main principles was this concept of like humanity, team humanity, and we're all part of a human team, and we want to lift each other up. And humans are petty, and we need to evolve our pettiness so we can get along as a human team. That, world peace, I know that's very sort of an altruistic goal, but when I was a little girl and I had an opportunity to wish on something, it was either get my parents back together or world peace. And that was
the big two.
The big two. Yeah. For my parents would not be divorced anymore, and I could have
Oh.
world peace. So I feel like my parents were ex-hippies. Like we marched for, against nuclear war in the 80s and no blood for oil in the 90s. And we were like anti-war, pro-peace was a big part of my upbringing. So that was like a real strong tenet for me. And then the interpersonal stuff, like the concept that we have limiting beliefs, we have things that we believe about ourselves and the world. They call them postulates, things that we believe about the world that may be true, may not be true. We need to evolve those things so that we don't react to petty stuff. And that was sort of the idea, is that we, and parts of this I still believe, because it's based on sort of like psychology 101, which is that we are born and we're children, we don't have a logical mind, and we're making meaning of the world. And sometimes we make meaning in ways that isn't accurate. And then we grow up and we become adults and we're logical, but that logical foundation is on that logical belief system is on an illogical foundation. So sometimes you got to go back to that foundation of things that happened in your childhood and relook at it. That's like psychology. That's not NXIVM, but NXIVM pulled from so many different psychological modalities and methods, including cognitive behavioral therapy, neurolinguistic programming, basic tenets of Buddhism. Like if you went into a spiritual bookstore and found like the best of everyone from Deepak Chopra to Eckhart Tolle to Oprah, like whoever, and like put it in a 5-day with some actual psychological practices, it's all there. So I really loved the concept of being like, okay, I'm trying to be the best version of myself. And if I'm getting in my own way by procrastinating or not dealing with conflict well, or not being a good communicator, or being reactive towards a family member who I love but also drives me crazy, like those are just things I can work on. And I loved that idea that I could evolve myself to be more optimal.
Well, that's fascinating. Now, this is so it's kind of like a lot of using a lot of psychological and principles and stuff like that. What in one sense was this at did it have any religious tenets that it like believe that we were spiritual beings, that there's an afterlife, there's a God? I mean, kind of what was any kind of that, any elements in there as well?
Well, it's interesting because it was contradictory, and it was something that I was always like, I thought it was my limitation that I couldn't understand it, because on one end they would say this program is not religious because we want everyone from all walks of life, Muslims, Christians, Jews, to come together and have a community that is separate from that, because what one community thinks is good is another person's bad. Suicide bombing, for example. Right. So so much of what we did was define terms. What is good? What is good in a way that the whole world could agree upon? And so there was definitions for all of these things, which is what we spend a lot of our time doing, defining basic concepts. What is good? What is bad? What is honesty? What is value? What is work? What are these terms so we could have a working definitions that would transcend all religion? But then there was this is what I understand now that I've researched coercive control and high control groups, is that we didn't really talk about God per se, but it was a subtle presentation that in many ways Keith was God. Keith knew everything. Keith had total recall. Keith was one of the smartest men in the world. And no one would ever say that, but people would refer to him as if that was the final answer. Like if we were talking about some concept, well, Keith says da 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 da, just like I'm imagining people quote the Bible.
Very
so true. And there was some spiritual things that were mentioned. They weren't taught, but like sort of off the side. Like I remember Lauren, who's Nancy Salzman, who's the Keith's sort of right-hand woman, her daughter, who I was the closest to probably than anyone else in the company, more so than Keith or Nancy, but she shared with me once that she believed that Keith visited people in their dreams. Like he had the capacity to do that, which is very spiritual and super not the whole point of this methodology. It was supposed to be scientific, measurable, and duplicatable. And it was the first time that in the history of psychotherapy or psychology that was being done. That's what we were taught. I don't believe that anymore. So there was that element, and that like there was reference to like him maybe being able to like affect the weather or turn the lights off and on. That's something that I really like believed or upheld. But I remember comments about stuff like that. So there were some people that really did revere him in that sort of way. And there was talk about like New Age, the New Age philosophy not being measurable. And this was the way, because it was measurable, it was scientific. And so, yeah, to answer your question, no, it wasn't religious, but it became people's religion.
Okay. So this is a classic personality cult. I'm actually reminded of a church that I grew up in my own backyard. Actually, he just lived just a mile or two from our house, but Jack Hiles of First Baptist Church in Hammond, Indiana, was one of the world's largest Sunday school, one of the largest churches in the country growing up. And people would have coffee mugs with his picture on them. They revered him. He did not necessarily require that, but this group kind of developed, but he didn't discourage it either. It's almost like he let that happen. He didn't stomp it out. But he didn't maybe necessarily say anything, but it just kind of happened organically. So he developed this great personality cult. I mean, when I say great, like it was quite large. And then I'm also reminded of Dan Vogel, his latest book, Charisma Under Pressure, about Joseph Smith. And the idea is that charisma is not necessarily what the leader is exuding. It's often the charisma that the people are projecting onto the leader. these things, the very power that you think. Sometimes people think that this is a charismatic person and that they can control people, but often the people are projecting onto that person, and that thus the control happens that way as well.
Absolutely. And actually that's something that we talked a lot about, was projection, because that's a key tenet of psychology, right? And there was actually a whole class on projection, the different types of projection. And it never occurred to me, and I think Keith relied on this, that people projected who they wanted to see as a leader, and they projected goodness. Like, one of the things I really grappled with when everything fell apart is like, how could I have believed that he was this great person? And I was actually like projected your own value. And that's what we do. We want to follow people that have our values. And we, like, my husband and I always not laugh, but we are always shocked when we realize how much we underestimated their, when I say their, I mean the leaderships, their capacity to lie. Because we don't lie. And that's something that's so ironic, because that's actually something that we talked about, is that you can only you project your own experience. So if you're you're the type of person who never lie and you only tell the truth, you may have, until you have an experience, you assume that other people are honest.
Yeah.
If you're a liar and you tell little white lies, when people are like, oh, I'm just around the corner, you're like, I don't believe you. You know what I mean? Because so that's something that actually really helped me in my life, is understanding that and we're always projecting. Like, I'm looking at you right now and you've got your hand on your chin, and that's like data. So this is what we would do at NXIVM. It's gonna be a little sidebar NXIVM tidbit. Okay, his hands on chin, he's smiling, he's nodding. If I was doing that, I'd be like interested in the conversation, right? And so I'm projecting based on me and what I would do. Right. He's still nodding, so I feel like we're in agreement. But let's say he like looks away and is not focused. I'm like, oh no, I've lost him. He's not interested anymore. And it could just be that he heard a noise or has gas or something, you know what I mean? Like, so we have all these different things that when we interact with people, and like, but so to answer one of your earlier questions, that particular nugget was so helpful for me in my life, because I realized I projected all the time. And because of certain anxieties and low self-esteem, I was projecting people were mad at me or didn't like me or whatever, all sorts of BS that like, you know, you kind of grow out of also when you become an adult, you don't care. But projection was it something that what we learned, I never considered I was projecting something inaccurate onto the leadership.
Okay.
So yes, an answer to your, and that was a very long-winded answer, but yeah, I did project a lot. We projected things that were not true. And also we were told things, like we were told from the beginning that Keith was celibate, that he didn't need sex or material possessions because he was so integrated, he was so evolved. And again, never occurred to me that when he was late for trainings or a forum and we're all sitting there waiting for the Vanguard to appear, he was late because he was finishing a threesome with his executive board, for example.
Okay.
It eventually goes there in most high demand, high control situations.
Right.
I'll just say that it eventually ends up there for some reason. So,
yes.
Well, and I would say that, so I first became aware even of the existence of this organization in the news. Did you feel like that, Steve? Suddenly Keith Raniere, and you're like, well, what is this? And then I became extremely fascinated, because I am fascinated in high demand, high control situations and the dynamics there and the psychology behind it. And so we'll, in the show notes, I think, put links to the, you know, there's the Vow, there's some other programs that have come on just about the cult, but Keith himself was so fascinating to me, just watching the different footage of him, because he's very unassuming looking. Like you would never imagine that he was this. So I think maybe it might be helpful just to tell the viewers and the listeners, just, you know, how did he even, I mean, you stepped in at a point. How did he even develop this? How did this even begin? He just looks like a nobody on the street. You would never imagine that he had this control over people and wreaking havoc in people's lives. I was very fascinated by that.
Sure. Yeah. I think the word I used in my book was schlubby.
Yeah.
Total schlub. So a couple things that he did. And I believe he studied a playbook. I believe he studied other people who did this first. L. Ron Hubbard, David Koresh, Jim Jones. He had all the books in his library. So I think he was just a avid learner and copycat. Not even an original cult leader, really. And so the time I met him, I had already taken a 5-day training with before and after every class, we'd say, thank you, Vanguard. Okay. Which was his given name, which just means leader of a philosophical movement. It's not weird at all. It's just a title. And if you have any reactions to that, it just means you have authority issues. So, okay, I'll accept that. Don't want to have any issues. And by the time I met him, I'd heard what we call the Greek chorus. There's so many people who'd put him up on a pedestal of like, he's the most ethical man in the world. He's the most noble man in the world. Keith Raniere, Vanguard, has helped me with blah, 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 and changed my life and blah, 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 blah. And he's got an IQ of 240 and he's part of the Mega Mensa Society and he's skilled pianist and judo champ and blah, 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 blah. So by the time you meet him, like by the time I met him, I respected him. I respected this man that I had heard was so renowned. And I was shocked at his normalness. In fact, and I noticed this for the 12 years I was in, if there was ever a forum where he spoke, and there was times where he became more and more scarce, like it was a rare thing to see him because he would be behind closed doors solving the world's problems or other things. And he would do a forum, and then Nancy would come out and be like, wasn't he amazing? Wasn't he just fantastic? And especially if it was at a retreat where there was new people, new attendants, she'd say, who was hearing Keith or Vanguard for the first time? And people would always raise their hand. And she'd say, what was it like for you? And every time somebody new would say something like, I was really surprised at how just kind of normal he is. Like, he's just a guy, which in that model would have been deemed as like suppressive, like not like, oh my God, he's amazing. Right. So, but Nancy would always turn that around and go, isn't that incredible that somebody at his level of awareness and integration can just get to our level and just be so accessible. So it was turned around as this like gift. So that's one thing, is that the way that he was propped up by the people around him, and that they did that by edifying, but to put him on a pedestal. And again, we trusted that those things were true, which turns out they weren't. But to answer your question, I think what's really key is that he was really good at rapport. He was really good at getting into connecting with you. Like if you were chatting with him or talking to him about something, he would, now I know, his direct eye gaze will stare deep into your soul and maybe even hold your hand. And you felt like the world stopped. It was just like, just me and him. He really sees me. And I personally, for a number of different reasons, which I'm still trying to figure out, like I think intuitively, I just felt really uncomfortable. I didn't let myself get that close to him. But I saw it with women around him, including women that I brought in who were, getting closer and closer and invited into special projects. And what I've since found out, because this wasn't my experience, but consistently with the women that I've spoke to, is that it would start as that, like a connection where they felt safe. And I think because he was so nerdy and unassuming, they wouldn't ever expect or suspect that he had other intentions, right? And so once the women had sort of let him in as a confidant, and when I also look from a psychology point of view, a lot of these women had what we call daddy issues, like not good relationships with their father, which I have a great relationship with my dad. So I think these women were looking for an older man to kind of guide them and support them. So they let him in. And also because he's celibate, right? He's not going to do anything. Let him in. And at that point, he would usually invite them to some special project or like endow them with a feeling of specialness, that they had some gift. Like I remember a friend of mine from Vancouver who told me after we got out that Keith was always messaging her on Facebook and telling her, like basically praising her for certain skills. That we heard that she was a really good writer, or blah, blah, blah. And like, would she come to Albany and join this special team or this special thing? So he did that with people completely in a unique way with each person. I counted later that he invited me to 5 different projects over my time there, none of which I bit on because they were all stupid ideas. I didn't realize that was his invitation, right? Or intuitively, I don't know what it was that saved me from that. But then I got married to my husband and he had to brand me to try to get to me. But that's a separate story. We'll get to that in a minute.
Yes.
But yeah, I do think that he was really skilled at rapport, at trying to, I think it's a game for him. Like, what does this woman want? How can I give it to her? How can I make her feel special? And then part of that was, I think you have trust issues. I want to have a relationship with you and help you with these issues. And by that point, it's like, it's the Vanguard wanting to help me. Whoa. And then I think once sex gets into the picture for these women, they're amped up and amped up and amped up. And we counted, my husband and I counted that we knew of somewhere between 60 and 80 women that he for sure was having sex with. And I think at any given time, because we were there for 12 years and some people left, some people died, but in any given time, he had access to 12 to 15 women in New York, like in Albany, that he was bed hopping with.
It always happens. High demand, high control.
Yep.
And then, of course, you know, and I saw that too in the different documentaries that I watched. It was an attractive organization, just the things that it had to offer and the friendships and the person, you know, and I can relate to all of that, of course. And then it starts taking a turn that you kind of alluded to. Talk about when things started to definitely take that turn and get a little more nefarious, I guess.
Right. Well, what I've since learned is that it was nefarious from the beginning. It was just wasn't obvious. And
Right.
there were so many red flags that I missed. Like early days, I brought a girlfriend of mine in who moved there to pursue her issues so she'd be a better actor. And she I remember going to visit her and be like, hey, I'm in town, like I'd love to see you. And she's like, oh, I can't, I've got to be available for Keith. I was like, what? Like, were you working on a project? She's like, yeah, working on a project. And I just had this hit that there was something sexual there. But then I was like, she's in her early 20s. He's in his late 40s. He's the vanguard for early 50s at that time. Like, that's so not appropriate. And he's celibate. And then I like rejected the thought, you know, like put it on the shelf,
Right.
put it on the shelf. And so many things like that happened over and over and over again. But I'd say within the last 3 or 4 years is when things really shifted. One of my mentors died very suddenly of a brain tumor, which made no sense to me because she was like the pinnacle of health, drinking kombucha and green juice and infrared sauning and doing yoga. And then all of a sudden she had this like really aggressive cancer. A lot of people around him had cancer and a few people actually died of cancer. And I thought it was something in the water. I now believe that he actually poisoned them. And that was something that, and then that hasn't been proven. That's just a belief that I have. So that happened. And then I also like the structure of the company was changing. They weren't paying us properly. This is like the last third of my book where things get a little more like a crime thriller versus a personal development recount. And then all of a sudden it was okay. So a couple of things happened. I had my husband and I got married. We had our first child and I started to pull back because my values changed. My priorities changed. They felt that, promoted me to the next rank, which I'd been trying to get to for years. So that kind of pulled me back in. And every time I was sort of like on my way out, they pulled me back in with a promotion or a new shiny thing. And then one of the things was being invited to this group called DOS, which was supposed to be a women's empowerment group. The steps to that and how that happened are very complicated. We need another 2 hours. So if people want to know,
it was like a secret sisterhood. Within
but
what we were told actually that it wasn't part of the organization. Nothing to do with NXIVM, nothing to do with Keith. And this was just a boot camp for women who really wanted to uphold our values and have a next level accountability with a very like strict and very, what was the word? We had to take a vow of obedience to the person who brought us in. So we would obey whatever they said. And this was like, I'm in Vancouver, you're in New York. Like, how does this work? She's like, it's an exercise where you're committing to something and I'm keeping you accountable. And it was the lifetime vow to Lauren made sense to me because we were best friends. And it was like, of course, like I'm yours for life. Like, what's next? Like, it's a fun sorority. Yay. And it ended up very much not being that. And the tattoo that I was supposed to get as a part of my initiation to this sisterhood was a brand. You can't totally see it in this picture because it's keloid here, but what actually woke me up was not the branding itself, but recognizing weeks later that the symbol, if you looked in the mirror and turned your head to the side, was Keith's initials in a monogram, KR. That's what propelled me into like waking up, as we say in this space. So going, oh my God, everyone who's ever told me I was in a cult is right. And this is really bad and I have to get out. And then.
So you were hearing from people, the friends and family, that thought that you were caught up in a cult then?
Yeah, nobody sat down with me and did a proper intervention. Like, here's like Stephen Hassan or, you know, Yanya Lalich or some expert or anything like that. It was more like, oh, Sarah's in her cult. And we'd been trained to respond to that. Of course, it's a cult. It's a cult of happy, successful people. It's just a group of people who are really dedicated to a mission. And then we were taught to say, when you say cult, that implies there's something bad going on. What's bad? We're wearing sashes. Okay, that's weird. We call him Vanguard. I get it. That's weird. What's the bad thing? But all of a sudden, I saw the bad thing. I saw the bad thing. And the main bad thing that I realized with the help of Mark and other people who'd left before me and helped get me out was that it was all a lie. Keith is not the smartest man in the world. He's not a good person. He's a sociopath. He's a liar. He's a sex addict. He's a narcissist. So like I saw that all very, very quickly. So when people said to me, oh, you're in a cult, I just thought they didn't understand. I could see why they thought I was in a cult, but I didn't agree. So they just didn't get it.
Fascinating.
So,
You know, Rebecca, I don't know if you remember, but when I was on Mormon Stories last year, I talked with John DeLynn about how when I was a young boy, I was probably like maybe middle school, and I went to a friend and I said, you know, I could start a cult. I would make a good cult leader. And because
we all think that, Steve.
and it's fascinating to me because I do see that I have a lot of those qualities. And that's one of the reasons I went on Mormon Stories and said that, because I wanted to kind of create my own little like guardrails that would keep me from falling into that temptation of wanting to be a cult leader. And so I deliberately did that because I know my previous self, big ego, would walk all over people. You know, I literally had to be, I went through the gauntlet, and I've gone through the fire, and I'm a new creature. But the old me, and then but I had to guard against that. I said, I don't want to fall for that temptation, because I can see how even at a young age, I could manipulate people or tell them things and they would believe me. And it was innocent, but I could also see the power that somebody could do. So I remember even recognizing having that skill. I readily confess that because I want people to know that that's something that's always been in the back of my head. I don't know how you're processing that, Sarah, but I'm just telling you that I can see how they could do it, because in my mind, I could see how I could do it.
Yeah, I think that's actually something, because I've since had to answer a lot of questions for myself of what I knew of Keith and his background, and that does some digging there. And I think that's true. I think he figured out at a young age that he could lie and get away with it and manipulate people. In fact, he even taught us in a module about something called the fall, and even referred, now that I think about it, like talked about Lucifer and like the fall. I don't know enough about the Bible to know the story, but like Lucifer and the angels, the fall.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So the fall. Yeah, in NXIVM context is they told a story about a kid who was climbing the slide, and there was a rule about you have to wait till the person's gone down, and the kid climbing the slide kicked the kid below him, and the kid fell, and the teacher got upset, and then the kid who did the kicking started crying, going, "I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to," and the teacher forgave him. And he's like, in that moment, that this is the kid saying, I realized that I could lie and get away with it. So the kid took the fall, and they talked a lot about how it was, a normal person with a moral compass has a set of options and all these things they would do that are moral and right and good. And someone who's taken the fall has all these other options that include lying and stealing and cheating. So they have more options than your average good person. And they know that the good person only has these limited options.
Okay.
And they pretend to have these, but they're actually doing these. And the good people can't even imagine doing this. Exactly. So they have like that. And that's why people get away with all this shit in the world. And so they called those people suppressives or sociopaths. So I think what actually Keith was doing was talking about his own psychology. Yep. And saying, I figured out that I could do this. I could manipulate people. I could lie. And people wouldn't assume it because they're good people and they have a moral compass. My moral compass doesn't exist because I'll do whatever it takes. And those type of people exist, not just Keith, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think sometimes those type of people, they convince themselves that they're doing something for a higher good. I think maybe they also delude themselves a little bit, and say, well, these people need us. They need what I can do. It's okay if I lie or I manipulate in this way because it's for a greater good for these people. Yeah. Maybe they deny the own self-interest. Yeah. I mean, I've seen that. I think you see that in religion sometimes. So I'm very curious. The story of you and your husband was so interesting because in the Latter-day Saint faith, we have people that, one spouse will leave, one will be in, there's all that dynamic, which can be extraordinarily painful. And you and your husband have an interesting story being in it together and then leaving. maybe talk a little bit about that. Was one of you more
Sure.
onto what was happening first, or, I mean, I kind of know the story, but I find that
Yes.
very interesting. And a lot of people in Steve's audience, friends, family, people on different sides of a religion or a situation. So I think that'd be interesting to hear about.
Sure. Yeah. And I will say that the last like couple chapters of my book kind of go into more detail in this. And it does read like a thriller, because like when I start to wake up I couldn't tell Nippy, my husband, because I had taken this vow of secrecy in addition to the obedience. And I was so terrified of my collateral being released. So they had this blackmail on me that was being used to keep us all silent and to keep us loyal, which is what Keith needed to keep the women, which is now I see, like, he was starting to feel like people were leaving and he was losing his harem, and he had to like lock it down and keep people loyal, brand women with his initials, which is of course where he went off the radar. I'd already been branded. I knew that that was bad and wrong, and I needed to get out of DOS, but I hadn't made the connection with Keith yet, and that the connections with how bad NXIVM was. Like, I thought that DOS, the women's group, was like, oh God, okay. Because as soon as I committed, they said I needed to give new collateral every month for the rest of my life. And women were sending in like nude photos, and I'm like, I just like, what? I can't keep doing this. Like, this is horrific. I wasn't in for very long, like a matter of months. But meanwhile, I felt Nippy and I going separate. Like, I couldn't talk to him about it because it was my sisterhood, my secret sisterhood. So meanwhile, there was all these other things that were going on. Mark Vicente, who had brought me in, was quitting. People were quitting. There was a lot of dissent. And it wasn't actually till Mark and I finally spoke and had an honest conversation about what he knew. And he had heard that people were in Albany, there was a secret women's group, and that women were being tasked to have sex with Keith. And I hadn't had that yet, but I had been branded, and I told Mark under his NDA. So he had me sign an NDA to tell me what he knew, and I somehow felt safe there, which doesn't make any sense actually legally. But I shared what I knew, and he shared what he knew, and then we had a pretty good picture then, because up until then we'd been siloed. All of us had been siloed. We didn't know what the other hand was doing. And then I actually asked Mark to tell Nippy, because I was just too afraid at the time. And Nippy, thank God, like, he really got it. Like, he was able to see what was happening and not be mad at me, and to understand how I could have been tricked into that or coerced into that. So it was a matter of like 12 hours between me being fully awake and then him being like, okay, we're getting the F out of here. And then we were a totally united front from that point. And I mean, I can't say it's been easy. Our relationship was definitely strained, but in many ways it made us stronger, because we hit some real adversity, and we figured out that, it always makes me cry. Like, who I thought he was is really who I thought he was. And he's said vice versa. So like, his character is a loyal husband and somebody who would stand by me no matter what. Really came through, and he was truly my protector, which is ironic because he was part of the Society of Protectors thing, which is total BS. But like, what is a real protector is what emerged in this situation. And we had our second kid, and now we've got this beautiful family, and that's 100% the silver lining of this whole situation, is what we're able to overcome.
Astonishing story. I mean, it's and I have to ask you, I mean, you went through, I mean, did you have to go through any deprogramming? What has been the healing process like? Do you feel like you've suffered PTSD? Do you feel that you're still suffering from it, or that you're past it, you're healed? Where are you at now?
So I'm almost just over 6 years out, and right now I feel great. I've definitely gone through, I call it like ebbs and flows. There's times when I feel like I'm totally back to normal. I'm totally healed. And then there's something in the news cycle, like somebody finally wakes up and calls me, and then it's not so much that I get triggered, but it just brings up, I guess maybe it's triggered, brings up a lot of stuff. I definitely had severe PTSD or CPTSD, and tried a lot of different things to heal that. And I feel like I have, but I also feel like something else could happen and it might set me off again. So I'm always just aware that it's not, I feel like it's sort of a lifelong journey. But right now I feel probably the best I ever have in terms of being grounded and not triggered, and I can sleep. Like that was a real thing. It was my sleep took a big hit. I felt like, you know, similarly to how I hear vets talk about, you know, like waking up and thinking they're in an attack. Like I felt like I was at war. Any sound or movement would just like, and that also affected my driving. Like that's where it really hit me most, driving and sleeping. Just super on edge and like hyper vigilance that I couldn't overcome.
So what things, types of therapy or things that you did that helped you get to where you're at now?
So I've done different things, and depending on how bad it was, like at the worst, I actually ended up going on Ativan for about a month to sort of reset my nervous system. That was the most sort of like chemical or, you know, Western medicine thing I ever did. When I've done other things like trauma therapy and more alternative forms of therapy or healing, like I did a lot of CBD, and then a lot of just physical things for my body, like a lot of the stress. I had one therapist tell me you either have to cry it out or sweat it out. The cortisol and the hormones and everything that's happening in my body. So like for me, hot power yoga is one of the best things because I sweat and I feel like I just like drain my body of all these you know, chemicals and hormones that are flooding me. I spend a lot now, like I have like a maintenance routine that I think works really well for me. I walk every day. I do yoga almost every day. I have to get out in nature. I do a lot of forest bathing, you know, just being in nature and having that clean oxygen. I have a hot bath with Epsom salts pretty much every night. And that really just relaxes my body. Because a whole lot of tension in my body. What else? I mean, there's things that were my therapy at the beginning in terms of actual deprogramming. I worked a lot with Dan Shaw. I don't know if you're familiar with his work. He writes about the traumatized narcissist. And he was my therapist. And what was great about him is that he already knew about NXIVM. So I didn't have to explain who Keith and Nancy were. I didn't know, he knew the players, and that saved a lot of time and money. I deprogrammed with him. I deprogrammed with the book Take Back Your Life by Janja Lalich, which I love. And I actually ended up narrating the Audible version of it because of everything I just mentioned, couldn't sit still enough to read the book. And that's why I always tell people who write books like that, get it on Audible, because I think a lot of survivors can't sit still. I mean, right. I still, like, I always listen on Audible. I'm like walking, doing the dishes, you know. So I think the deprogramming happened the most there, and then educating myself. So I watched a lot of movies. I watched Going Clear. I watched Holy Hell, Wild Wild Country. All of those things helped me tremendously, and then still help me with things that have come out since. Just seeing the same template in other groups every time helps me so much. And then I think the biggest sort of wasn't therapy, but was therapeutic, was talking to ex-members and being in a safe space where we could actually express how we really felt. And I didn't realize how suppressed I was in NXIVM. I couldn't go up if I told because there's a hierarchy, right? So if I went up, I'd be gaslit. And if I expressed any concern, I'd be complaining, which is a negative female trait. And if I expressed down to the people that I was in charge of, that would be bad leadership. And so I had nowhere to express. If I went out to the community, to my mother, people who weren't involved, who were already concerned, then that would give them proof to be more concerned. So I was sort of like stuck with these doubts. And I've since learned that doubt your doubts, right? Like doubts are just
oh dear,
right?
She said it.
Yeah. I've learned this. I've learned this because later I got to speak at the John DeLynne's event.
Yeah,
and
Thrive. I was there. That was the first time that I ever met you, and it was amazing.
Right.
And yeah, yes. And everything you're saying resonates so much in the post or perhaps nuanced community, everything you're talking about. And I was going to ask you, so now Keith has gone to prison. He's gone through the court system. However, there are still people, and I believe even some close or friends of yours that still follow him. They still believe. Is that difficult to have people that you know that are still being harmed in that way, even though he's on the inside? I mean, in one of the documentaries, I think maybe it was The Vow or something, there are people standing outside of his outside of prison, flashing lights, to communicate with them. And that must be really difficult if there are people that you're still close to that are still involved. That's hard.
Definitely. That's been really hard. The person who I actually brought in, who was in the Vow season 2, Nikki, she's since woken up and since
Oh,
has
good.
denounced
Okay.
Keith. So she was
Good.
the sort of the last person that I personally was like really working hard to help her see the light from behind the scenes, because of course she wasn't going to trust me, because I'm a suppressive who destroyed the organization. So that's a huge relief. There are, I think, somewhere between 10 and 20 people who still, there's no classes to attend, but they're in a community of a virtual community, I guess, and they believe Keith is good and that we are bad and he's misunderstood and everything he did was for a good reason and we just don't understand and blah, 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 blah. So yeah, but that is really hard, especially when some of those people were at my wedding and were friends that I really miss and would love to have closure with and probably never will.
So this is the thing. I know that we need to wrap things up in a little bit here because you got to go pick up your kid from school, from my understanding. Yes. But I wanted to ask you is also because I also think I want to know about what you're doing since. Now, for instance, I want to tie this into, you wrote a book and now you also have a podcast.
Yes.
And I want you to talk about the book and I want you to talk about the podcast. And I also want you to talk about how the act of writing a book and doing a podcast, one, probably helps build a community for you, like it's built a community for me. And two, how it's also probably helped in your healing process as well, because you get to talk these things through, whether you're writing it down or you're talking on your podcast.
Yes. So I'll start with the book. Truthfully, I feel like I wrote the book too soon. It was cathartic, but I feel like I was so much in this sort of activist phase of like, got to get the truth out there, got to warn people. And at first, it was just like, we have to shut down NXIVM. I didn't know that I'd be going on this whole crusade to expose coercive control in the world. That came later. It was like, I have to save my friends, free the slaves, because that's what they were in DOS. It was a slave master relationship, which of course makes no sense, but that's what it was. I mean, there were women who were literal slaves for Keith. So yeah, but even though it was written too soon, in some ways, I feel like the book is a draft. There was so much more to the story that I couldn't even process because I was still so much in PTSD and didn't even realize it. But what I like about it is it captures that segment. I mean, the trial wasn't even over, right? We didn't know that he'd be going to jail for 120 years. The trial had just started when the book was done, and I was just learning about what happened to other people, which was way worse than what happened to me. And so I was still processing. That's why I mean it was written too soon. Like if I'd written till after he was in jail, I may have felt a little more free also. And I didn't even realize I wasn't feeling free. But yes, it was cathartic. And it's been a great way for me to say, here, read the book. If you want to know what happened, read the book. And then the vow was actually another level of that. The vow was another level of, and sorry, good news. My husband, I think, is going to pick up ACE, which will give me a little bit more
minutes.
time.
Great. Excellent.
Yes. Sidebar. And so yeah, but it did give me like a way to communicate with people who've been through similar things. But when the vow came out, which was the year after, was a time when my life kind of blew up. But like the book was great, and I felt cathartic with that, and it was wonderful. But then the vow blew up my life because this is COVID. Everyone's watching The Tiger King, and everyone's watching Vow, and people were reaching out from all over the world, going, "Oh my gosh, I am a member of the FLDS. I'm a Jehovah's Witness. I'm Orthodox Jew. I was in an abusive relationship. I was in CrossFit and Bikram yoga. Like the same thing happened to me." And I'm like, oh shit, I wish I'm not a psychologist. I want to help you. I don't know how to help you. And then I'm like sending them to Yanya, sending them to Stephen Hassan, sending them to John DeLynn. I'm like, I don't know how to help you. But it was great. It was great. That was probably the most healing, is feeling like, okay, what a shitty 16 years, like 12 years in, and then, number of years out. And those years out, even though I was out, I was a mess. Like, I was not like, oh, I'm awake and now my life is great because I'm free. It's like, I was deprogramming. I was reconciling, like, I was a recruiter. I'd brought all these people in. How was I going to help them? It's getting them legal counsel. I'm trying to get them on their feet. I'm helping them get therapy. I'm still me. Like, I'm still trying to help people. Back to your question from an hour ago, what was the tenet that I was drawn to? I loved helping people. Like, I was going to be either an actress or a psychologist. So now I got to pursue my acting on the side, but also help people evolve their psychology. Right. So I almost like got to be a therapist without having to go to school. Right. So I like to help people. That's just who I am. Right. I've got the Band-Aids in my purse. I got the vitamins when you have a cold. That's just me. So now I'm still helping people, but on the other side of the calls, helping them get on their feet. But it was very meaningful to me. And the vow opened up a bunch of doors that I wasn't expecting. Somebody reached out once the vow was done and said, that I'm a podcast producer. I think you have an incredible story. I think you should do a podcast. I was like, I've written a book. There's another podcast that was made about us I didn't produce called Escaping NXIVM, which was out before the vow and before the book. And I was like, that's already been made. That had 25 million downloads at the time, this podcast. Okay. So that podcast, the book, the vow, I'm like, really? You think we should do a podcast? But it was COVID. And like, we're already having these conversations with people like Yanya and Steven and John DeLynn. It's like, why not record them and share them with the world? And that was the birth of it. I put it on my Instagram, like, who's interested in hearing more? And my Instagram had gone from like 2,000 to 20,000 over the period of about 6 weeks because of the vow, and which is small compared to, like, influencers who've got 5 million or whatever. But for me, just this, small town girl from Vancouver, it was a huge outreach. Like, the people wanting to connect was incredibly overwhelming. So I thought, hey, if people want to know more, let's do a podcast. And someone reached out to us who was a former copywriter. And she said, I think you should call it a little bit culty. And she helped us produce the show. And she's still our producer, Jess Tardy. And so she helped us with the tagline. She helped us with sort of the structure, which is to speak to survivors, experts, whistleblowers, many of whom are all three of a particular group, and learn. We follow a very similar format with every guest. How did they get in? What did they think they were signing up for? What was good about it at first? So people can see what those red flags are, like what the honey is on the outside that draws people in. What were the red flags along the way? And how did you get out? What was the thing that woke you up? And then how are you healing? Similar to what we did today. I think a lot of podcasts like this follow a similar structure. And then interspersed in that is also, Nippy and I, the only reason we've survived is that he's hilarious and we laugh all the time. So there's a humorous part of it. We have a couple of segments. One is called Word Salad, where Nippy reads quotes from the prophet or the guru or the leader, and we just laugh about how ridiculous it sounds. And another one's Chaps My Ass. Sorry for swearing again, cussing.
Okay.
But that's where we talk about, the thing that really bothers us the most. So we always ask our guests, like, when you think back to your time there, what chaps your ass the most? And we get hilarious answers. So it's heavy, and can be dark, but it's also light. And I'd say that has been the most meaningful, cathartic, wildly challenging and growth-filled part of this whole experience. But I love it. We're over 100 episodes in now. We're season 6. It's our full-time career. It's what we do. We put our entire life force into it. And we have 125,000 downloads a week. So I think we're doing good.
Yeah, doing really good. That's fantastic. Wow. Rebecca, I'm sure you have some more questions for her. Since we have a few more minutes, why don't you ask away?
Yeah, I just wanted to say it was really wonderful when a group of us from our The Good Book Club, we hadn't started Mormonish yet, but we were at Thrive, and Sarah got up and she gave her presentation. It resonated with all of us so much. We just loved her, and we had to run up and say, oh, will you come talk to our book club? You're going to find this audience that is just going to love you. And then to just dive into some of our other projects and discover a little bit culty. I mean, it's just really good to be aware. And like you said, you handle it with humor, but you also give people tools. You know,
Mhm.
they may recognize something in themselves on your different programs. They may recognize something in someone else, you know. So I just love that. And I guess I want to ask, do you at this point, do you kind of feel like, all right, I've arrived. I feel fulfilled. I am doing what I was meant to do, because I get that sense about you. I mean, I feel that for you when I look at everything that you've done. Do you have other things that you're hoping to do going forward, or are you like, you know what, I'm in a good place right now? Because that's how we kind of see you. I think is just, you know, doing this
Aw.
wonderful good for people.
Thanks for saying that. Made me cry. Yeah, I feel very fulfilled. I do. I feel like this is a roundabout way to getting to the purpose that I was looking for. And I feel sort of there's extensions of that. You know, when I spoke at Thrive, that was the first big audience that I'd spoken at, and that was really wonderful and meaningful for me. And I'm going to continue to do that. I've done a couple since, one for TEDx, which will be coming out soon, and I'll send it to you to share with your channel, because it's a kind of a nice summary of like the red flags and the green flags of what to look for people who have zero cult education, just like for the general public. That was in front of 3,200 people, and that was a lot. I think Thrive was 1,500 or so. And I'm going to continue to speak. I've done a couple of things since online and a couple in person, and we'll see how that goes. I really am enjoying just the podcast, because I can do it while the kids are at school, and then I can be a mom when they're out from school. And I don't want to travel too much. I don't want to miss any more of their lives. And maybe I'll go back to acting. You know, if White Lotus season 3 is like, hey, let's get that girl from The Vow, then I would definitely do that. But I'm not going to do silly things anymore.
Okay, yeah, I was
All the
going to
time.
ask about that, your future acting career. You know, obviously you got the kids and everything like that, and you have a very successful podcast, but I imagine you still have that itch now and then that you want to get back in front of this on the screen.
Yeah, you know, I like being on set. I like working. I don't like auditioning. And so much of the acting world is a hustle that I just don't have in me anymore. You know, I just doesn't the ROI is not enough. And the ROI I get from the podcast is so much more. So, like I said, if I get offered a role, which does happen every now and then, you get offers, which I'm not really famous enough to be getting. I'm not like Hilary Swank or something, but like if somebody were to offer me something, I would consider it. I'm not really interested in the audition hustle at this point in my life. Maybe another point, but like right now, I like the lifestyle. Auditions really suck. They're like, okay, tomorrow you got to be here at this time. You got to be put together. You have to memorize 10 pages of script. I can't live like that. I'm not in my 20s anymore, where I can, you know, I got to pick up the kids from football and make dinner and, you know, prep the next podcast. I have time. So that's where I'm at with it.
Have you thought about writing another book? I feel like you have
Yes.
this eagle eye view of just the entire high demand, high control across the spectrum, be it religious, be it, you know, business, coaching, all you
Yes.
see it. I think a book would be absolutely
It's
incredible
the
from your point of
proposal.
view.
You're the first to know this. The proposal's almost done. Yeah.
Oh,
Oh, fantastic.
awesome.
Yeah.
No, you do.
Yeah.
You have that perspective that not very many people have, and you've talked to so many people, and I
Yes.
feel that this would be incredible. Wow. Woo,
I
we
can't
heard
wait
it here,
You
Steve.
heard
This
it
is
here
awesome.
first. Breaking
This is
news.
great.
This is
Awesome.
exciting.
Well,
Wow.
and you know what? That means, Rebecca, that you're going to be on a special Mormon book reviews episode
Yes,
in which
Yeah.
we
we
have
have
Sarah
to
to
come
come back
back
on to talk about her book.
for
Absolutely, I
sure.
will. Count on it.
Yeah, that'll
Awesome.
be amazing.
That's great. Well, I
Okay.
think we had a great conversation today. What do you
I
two
think
think?
so too.
That was
Yeah.
That was so
wonderful.
fun.
Yep.
And I hope
Wonderful.
the
Really
audience,
appreciate that.
Yep.
thank you. Thank you. Thank you for taking your time and doing this. And I want to hear from the audience. What do you think of this conversation? Whether you are in a religion or not, I'd like to get your thoughts on this. And I do have one quick question for you,
Yes.
Sarah, actually. So I am an evangelical Christian.
Mhm.
And of course, I was raised that, and then I left as an atheist, and I'm much more nuanced. So I'm not like a fundamentalist Bible thumper or anything like that. But I am just curious, as somebody who was kind of raised more progressive and then, you know, and everything like that. Have you ever looked at Christianity as something you would be interested in? Or I'd even just like to hear what your thoughts are in Christianity in general.
Sure. Yeah. Well, first of all, my grandfather was an Anglican minister.
Okay.
So my mother was raised culturally Jewish. So like my dad, so I celebrated Christmas and Hanukkah.
Okay.
I didn't ever go to Bible study in either Judaism or Christianity. but I knew enough to, I guess, like understand the basics. But I feel like, how do I say this? I don't want to offend anybody. I just not crazy about organized religion on any front. Like I love my Jewish friends. I love my Christian friends. I love my friends who are atheists. Like I have a huge range of beliefs in my circle of friendships. But I think generally most of the people that I'm close with don't have a I want to say connection with God as a God, but more of like a connection with source or the universe, or like more of it. They're more spiritual, I'd say, than religious, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
And I just feel like there's just so much dogma that gets unquestioned in the church, at the synagogue, and anything that's with this more organized. And I don't, just because of my experience, I don't like it. I don't like the big group thing. Even I went
Okay.
to I went to a Braves game, and everyone's doing like the
The chop.
tomahawk
Yep.
chop, and I'm
Yeah.
like, I'm so uncomfortable. Like I know it's just a Braves game, but like it just people in a mass while doing things
Outdoor.
together. I think it can be good and also so dangerous, because you're getting people to do this thing, and then it's only one more step to this other thing.
That's
So
very true.
that's that kind of thing I get really concerned about. And even if it's so good intentioned, well intentioned at the beginning, it's the wrong person in power taking that group of well intentioned people and doing something bad. It's just like the tipping point is so narrow for me. So I support people's journeys. I don't ever try to shame them, or sure, as you know, in your journey here, like I like to be able to talk about it. So I think this is great. But I'll tell you one funny story is that when I was 2, my mom, as I said, is Jewish, and my Christmas celebrating dad went to England, was where my grandparents lived. And they went out, and my grandma was supposed to be watching me. She took me across the street to the church to get baptized. Just in case.
Sneaky,
And
just in
sneaky.
case.
And when I confronted her years later, I was like, Grandma, did you baptize me when I said that? She's like, oh, darling, well, you know, Jesus was a Jew after all. And
Well, that
she sent
reminds
me,
me how I was secretly baptized by my Catholic neighbor as an infant. She did the
oh,
same
really?
thing to me. And I do want to say that I've never actually belonged to a church, because I don't believe in church membership. So I would say I'm more spiritual than religious. But I want to know,
Yeah.
then I know what you feel about Christianity and organized religion in general.
Yeah.
I would like to know, what do you think of Jesus?
That seems like a pretty good dude. I don't know. Like I feel like I guess I think of, like, when I think of Christianity, like the good parts of it, like love their neighbor, and all those sort of tenets of how to live a good life. Like that sounds all great. He also, I mean, I can't say that I have my biblical studies down to where I could quote certain things, but my sense is that he was a good person, and this is the stuff that happened around it, and like how it was, like the crucifixion, and then the coming back, and like all that stuff. That part is where I get lost. I don't know.
Understood. I get
So
that.
that's
I
where
get
I'm
that.
at with Jesus. I'm like, it
Okay.
sounds like a solid guy, but then his message got a little distorted. People used it to manipulate, and also because I'm Jewish, like also blame the Jews, and I don't know, gets messy.
Got it.
Let's
Got it.
let's focus on what's happening right now.
Okay. Well, I think that's great. I think it's great for
Amen.
us to focus on all our mental health,
Yeah.
to get healing, in any way that works for us. I think it's for you as an individual. I think that's important. And I really want to thank you for coming on. This was a lovely conversation.
Oh, it's such a pleasure. Oh, I have one more thought about Jesus real quick
Oh,
before I
please,
go.
please.
That's okay.
I love talking about Jesus.
Where I get my back up a little bit is when I hear people, and I'm living in the South now, so I hear it a lot, but people saying things about like letting Jesus into your heart, and like deferring to Jesus, like what would Jesus do? And well, Jesus, da 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 da. And there's a sort of like separation of self and putting a responsibility on something else outside of yourself that I find a little cringy, and it doesn't work for me. Like, I guess I do have a relationship with God. I just don't call it God. I have a sort of way of being that many people would probably say is what they learned from Jesus. You know what I mean? But I feel like it's more of an inner connection versus an outer connection. And like, so people say when they want to thank God or thank Jesus for something, I'm like, no, you did that. That's from within you. So that's where I feel like it gets misused, or it not properly not a proper attribution. I don't know. That's just my opinion. But I, again, respect everybody's journey.
Well, Rebecca, you know what is a sign of a good podcast episode? What is a good sign? Is that you try ending it about 3 times, but then you keep talking because
And
it's
you
just such a
keep
great
going.
conversation.
Let's
That's a
go
sign of a
for
good
real.
episode.
It is very real. And now I think you can see, Steve, why Sarah just absolutely resonates, especially in the post-Mormon community. I mean, the things that she describes, got to fly here. The things that she describes, it just absolutely resonates. And you've really crystallized a lot of the thoughts and feelings in that community too. So that's why we love her so much.
Thank you so much for having me. That was way too fun.
Yes, it was. And I think I made a new friend today. Sarah, you're an awesome
Absolutely.
human. I would just remind you all that we're going to have links in the show notes here. Also, don't forget the merch store, MormonBookReviews.com. We have these lovely hot chocolate mugs, t-shirts, hats, you name it. It's in the merch store. Those of you who'd like to financially support the channel, we have links to Patreon, Venmo, as well as PayPal. And I do want to thank those of you who are supporting this channel. Could not do it without you. And just remember, the most important thing is this, folks. Remember, all the voices of the restoration will be heard here on Mormon Book Reviews.